The rain had a way of making everything look older than it really was. The cracked pavement, the rusted gate, the faded paint on the small house at the end of the street, it all seemed to sag under the weight of time. Daniel Mercer stood across from it, hands buried in the pockets of his tailored coat, his polished shoes now dotted with muddy water. 5 years. 5 long years since he had last stood here. Back then, he had left in anger, in pride, in the certainty that he would never return. Now he was back, with more money than he had ever imagined, and a silence inside him that no success could fill. Behind him, the sleek black car idled quietly, its engine a soft hum that didn't belong in this quiet, worn-down neighborhood. It looked like a stranger here, just like he did. The driver leaned slightly forward. "Sir, should I wait?" Daniel didn't turn. His eyes remained fixed on the house that once held laughter, arguments, shared dinners, and long nights that stretched into dreams they used to believe in. "No," he said after a pause, his voice low. "I won't be long." But even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. He had thought the same thing 5 years ago, that he was just stepping out for a moment, that distance would make things clearer. Instead, it had stretched into years. He stepped forward, shoes sinking slightly into the damp ground. The iron gate creaked as he pushed it open, the sound sharp and familiar. He remembered fixing that gate once, sleeves rolled up, tools scattered around him. Elena had stood nearby, laughing as she held the flashlight, deliberately pointing it in the wrong direction just to annoy him. "You think you can fix anything," she had teased. Back then, he believed it. Now, standing in front of the same gate, he wasn't so sure. The porch light flickered weakly, casting uneven shadows across the peeling door. It looked smaller than he remembered, or maybe he had just grown used to bigger spaces, glass walls, polished floors, views that stretched across entire cities. Yet none of those places had ever felt like this one had. His chest tightened. He walked up the steps slowly, each one creaking under his weight as if reminding him that time hadn't stood still here. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something else, something familiar he couldn't quite place. Home. The thought hit him unexpectedly, and he almost stepped back. His hand hovered near the door, fingers curling slightly as hesitation crept in. For a moment, he considered turning around. Getting back into the car. Leaving this street, this memory, this unresolved past behind him again. It would be easier. It had always been easier to walk away. But then he remembered the nights, alone in penthouses that overlooked entire skylines, surrounded by everything money could buy, yet unable to escape the quiet that pressed against him. He remembered the moments when success felt hollow, when applause and recognition faded too quickly, leaving behind a single, persistent thought. Her. He knocked. The sound echoed through the house, dull and distant. He waited. Nothing. Rain tapped against the roof, steady and unbothered. A car passed somewhere far down the street, its tires hissing on wet asphalt. For a second, doubt crept in. Maybe she wasn't here anymore. Maybe she had moved on, built a new life, found someone who didn't leave when things got hard. Maybe he was too late. He knocked again, firmer this time. And then, a faint movement inside. His breath caught. Footsteps, soft and slow, approached the door. He straightened slightly, suddenly aware of everything, his posture, his appearance, the years written into the lines of his face. He had faced investors, competitors, entire rooms filled with people waiting for him to prove himself. None of that compared to this. The lock clicked. The door opened just a few inches. And there she was, Elena. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow, everything else fading into the background. She looked almost the same, and yet not at all. There was a quietness to her now, a stillness that hadn't been there before. The spark he remembered hadn't disappeared, but it was buried deeper, harder to reach. Her eyes met his. And just like that, 5 years collapsed into a single, fragile moment. Elena, his voice came out softer than he intended, rough around the edges. The words caught in his throat. He had imagined this moment so many times, what he would say, how he would explain, how he would fix what he had broken. But standing here now, none of it seemed enough. She didn't speak. Not a word. Her silence wasn't cold or distant, it was something heavier, something that carried time within it. It was the same silence she had given him the day he left, the silence that had followed him long after the door closed behind him. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said, forcing himself to continue. I needed to see you." No reaction. No anger. No welcome. Just stillness. He swallowed, glancing briefly past her into the dim interior of the house. It looked unchanged, frozen in a moment he had abandoned. "I heard you were still here," he added quietly. "I didn't know if He stopped again, the sentence unfinished, because the truth sat too heavily between them. He hadn't tried to know. Not once. Her hand tightened slightly on the edge of the door, knuckles paling just enough to reveal that something had shifted beneath the surface. But still, no words. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting the distance between them. I understand, he said. You don't have to say anything. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers closing around something he had carried all the way here, something that suddenly felt heavier than anything money had ever bought. And for the first time, her gaze flickered downward, toward his hand. From his pocket, Daniel pulled out something small. Not a check. Not a set of keys. Not anything that reflected the life he had built, the wealth, the influence, the power that had once felt like victory. It was an old envelope. Worn at the edges, slightly creased, its paper softened by time. It didn't belong to the man he had become. It belonged to the man he used to be, the one who had stood in this very doorway and chosen pride over everything else. Carefully, almost reverently, he held it out toward her. I found this, he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of anything unnecessary. Alina's eyes dropped to it. For the first time since she opened the door, something changed. It was subtle, a flicker, a crack, but it was there. Recognition settled into her expression, followed by something deeper, something that had been buried for years. Her fingers twitched at her side, but she didn't reach for it. Daniel stepped forward just enough to place the envelope on the small wooden table beside the door. The surface bore faint scratches, the same ones he remembered from years ago. Nothing here had been replaced. Nothing had been polished over. It was as if this place had been waiting. You wrote it, he continued. The day I left. The words seemed to land between them with a weight neither of them could ignore. Her breathing shifted, barely noticeable, but enough. Her shoulders rose slightly, then stilled again. I never opened it, he admitted. There was no defense in his voice. No attempt to justify himself. Just truth, raw and unfiltered. I couldn't, he added after a pause. I told myself it didn't matter. That whatever you wrote, it wouldn't change anything. He let out a faint breath, something close to a bitter smile. I was wrong. The rain outside had softened to a quiet drizzle, each drop less urgent than before. The world felt like it was slowing, giving space to the moment unfolding inside that narrow doorway. I found it a few weeks ago, Daniel said. In a box I hadn't opened in years. I almost threw it away without thinking. Just another piece of the past, right? His gaze lifted briefly to hers, searching, uncertain. But something stopped me. Alina's hand moved slightly toward the table, hovering just above the envelope, as if touching it too soon might undo whatever fragile thread had been pulled back into place. I opened it, he said. Her eyes lifted to his again, sharper this time, filled with something fragile and exposed. I thought it would be anger, he continued. I thought you'd tell me everything I deserved to hear. That I was selfish. That I ruined everything. That you hated me. His voice faltered for just a second. But you didn't. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full, of memory, of things unsaid, of words that had waited too long. You apologized, he said softly. The words seemed to echo in the small space. A tear formed in Alina's eye before she could stop it. It clung there for a moment, trembling, before slipping down her cheek. You said you were sorry, he went on, his voice almost unsteady now. That you didn't want me to leave like that. That even if we were broken, we didn't have to become strangers. His hand tightened slightly at his side, as if holding onto something invisible. And at the end, he hesitated, swallowing hard, you wrote that you'd be here. That no matter how long it took, you'd wait for me to come back and talk. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. Alina's lips parted slightly, her breath uneven now. More tears followed, tracing quiet paths down her face, each one carrying the weight of years she had spent holding everything inside. Daniel stepped back instinctively, giving her space, as if afraid that being too close might break whatever fragile moment was unfolding. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said quickly, almost urgently. I know I don't deserve that. I know I lost that right a long time ago. He glanced at the envelope. I just couldn't keep pretending it didn't exist, he added. I couldn't live with knowing you reached out, and I never answered. His voice dropped, softer now. So I came back. The rain stopped completely, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost unreal. Alina's hand finally lowered, her fingers brushing against the envelope. She didn't pick it up immediately. Instead, she traced its edge slowly, as if reacquainting herself with something she had once let go of. Her shoulders trembled slightly. 5 years of silence stood between them, heavy and unyielding. And then, her voice. It came out soft, fragile, like something unused for far too long. You took long enough. The words barely rose above a whisper, but they filled the space completely. Daniel froze. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His eyes searched her face, disbelief and relief crashing into each other all at once. Because that voice, that single sentence, held everything he had lost and everything he had feared was gone forever. I know, he whispered, his own voice breaking now. I know. The distance between them didn't disappear. The years didn't vanish. But something shifted, something small and fragile and real. And in the quiet that followed, the silence that had lived between them for 5 years finally began to loosen its grip.